It's my pleasure on behalf of our partners to welcome you here this morning. I know some of you were here yesterday, so it's great to have you joining us again today for another great programme of events and sessions. And we've also got this session webcast, so again a welcome to people who are webcasting in this morning. It's fantastic this year that we have so many partners working with us on digital health and care, and I think it's testimony to the work that's going on across Scotland and further afield. And it really feels like it is a cross-sector event and very much focused on trying to improve outcomes for citizens. So delighted, as I say, to have worked with CCPS, with the Local Government Digital Office, Digital Health and Care Institute, the British Computing Society for Health and Care Alliance. And obviously there's been lots more people involved, as you can see. We've got something like 950 registrations from yesterday to today, and including the public lecture this evening. So that's fantastic. I mean, that's, I say we've ran to a 2-day event this year, so we've absolutely more than doubled the number of participants that will be coming. We've 150 people speaking and contributing, and that's again a great testimony to what's going on. So people are coming as participants to the conference, but they're also coming to share the work that's underway. And we have 25 speakers from out with Scotland, international speakers, and again a number of international participants. We've about 16 events taking place over the course of this week as part of Digi Fest, and again a number of online webinars and events too, so a huge amount going on. I want to draw your attention though to events that took place in October as part of Digi Fest, and this is the Discover Digital, which is led by the Health and Care Alliance on behalf of partners. And this was the second year we ran Discover Digital, and it really, I suppose, is our attempt to try and engage with the wider public. So 750 people participated in 5 events across five localities in Scotland, places like the Glasgow Science Centre, Dundee Science Centre, so really in venues where the public are visiting. And there's a session today led by the Alliance that will be looking at some of the themes that came out of those events. It was held deliberately during Self-Management Week to sort of focus on how digital can support people. So that was great, and I think we look forward to doing something again next year, I'm sure. We've got attendees, as I say, from all across Scotland, so I think we've just got about every area represented. We've got attendees across all sectors. We've got health, social care, third sector, independent care sector, housing, industry, academia, and I'm probably leaving somebody out, but it's really great to see so many people here. And as I said yesterday, I think really take the opportunity to talk to somebody you haven't met before, talk to somebody from another sector. Today and yesterday has been about sharing the work and examples, but it's also about following up afterwards. So hopefully people don't say that was a great conference and see you again next year. Really make an effort to say I would like to find out something more about this, or follow up with people, because I think through that sort of partnership and collaboration, I think we'll aim to deliver better services for our citizens. So in terms of audience participation, we introduced Mentimeter yesterday. So those of you who were here yesterday know that you log on just on your phone using the website there. And we're going to use that at the 10:30 to 11 o'clock session. There's a participant code, and we will show it again just before we go into that. We had something like 170 questions or comments that came up during the plenary session yesterday. Our chairs will review what's coming in, obviously, to facilitate a discussion, but we also will be harvesting what came out of yesterday and today, because there's lots of interesting, I think, important questions and themes that we can look at how we respond and get some further communication out. And we'll also have roving mics in the audience. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't have our sponsors. So again, we make this event free for participants, and I think that's important because we want to make it accessible to people across all our sectors, but obviously it does cost. So we're really grateful. We've got 17 exhibitors. So again, I would encourage you to visit the exhibitors. They're really interested in hearing your ideas, your challenges, and also talking about some of the products and developments underway. So again, a very important part of our innovation cycle to involve people. Just before I finish my bit, I wanted to make a bit of a link with yesterday. So I said we had a great day yesterday. We had a keynote speaker, Luciella Gianni from Oracle, who talked a lot about service transformation. And she set out the 4 Ps, which I think did carry on through the day. So that was personalised, very much focusing on citizens and person-centred. Preventative, again, a big focus on prevention and tackling inequalities. Predictive, so how we use technology to help anticipate and predict. And participatory. So again, I think just reflect on those again through the course of the day. Another word that struck me in terms of the sessions I was at was mandate. So we had lots of great examples of what was underway, but again, there was a sense around we need more of a mandate to be digital first, where we've got the evidence. So again, that's maybe something the panel discussion can reflect on today. The other thing just to mention is we had a poster competition again this year for the first time, and again, I would encourage you, the posters are up on the mezzanine level, so encourage you to go and look at the posters. And we had 2 winners yesterday. The posters are all fantastic, but there was 2 winners, one for service development, and that was won by Alzheimer's Scotland, and they were looking at a CivTech, a proposal about looking at everyday technology that people have in their house and how that can be used to support people with dementia. And the research winner was University of Edinburgh and Napier University, looking at blood pressure monitoring. So again, congratulations to our winners, but well done everybody who entered the competition. I'm delighted to welcome Malcolm Wright, who's our Director General in Scottish Government from Health and Care. So very welcome, Malcolm, and Annie Gunnar-Logan, who is the Chief Executive of the Coalition of Community Care Providers in Scotland, CCPS, sort of, I know. And again, this is really testimony to the conference and DigiFest really being that sort of cross-sector collaboration across health and care, really focusing on citizens. I'm going to just show you a short animation before Malcolm and Annie come over and take over from me for the rest of the morning session. Some of you will have seen this yesterday, but I think it's worth showing to people just in terms of, it's only a minute and a half to show what's possible.
Health and social care is changing. Over the past decade, mobile technology has transformed the world we live in, from the way we watch television, listen to music, exercise, and how we communicate. Emerging technologies are starting to transform the way we care for and support citizens. From artificial intelligence and robotics to virtual reality and interconnected devices. Wearable technology already lets us monitor our health and well-being, providing insights and recommendations about changes we should make. Putting the individual at the centre, allowing them to navigate the system and take charge of their needs. In every walk of life, technology has the potential to improve well-being by making our society more efficient, connected, and equitable. The emergence of big data, cloud technologies, and smartphone adoption enables information to be linked together and processed for new insights. How can sharing this data across traditional health and care boundaries, while ensuring the individual is in control, transform relationships into genuine partnerships? How can it improve the quality of engagement and outcomes? Will new technology continue to benefit citizens who need support from the health and care system, while enabling staff, friends, and family to explore more meaningful activities with one another and the wider community? What can we do to ensure individuals can stay connected, feel safe and secure, and improve their quality of life? And how can we make sure citizens are at the centre of this brave new world. Together, we can put prevention and self-determination at the heart of digital health and care.
Hello. Good morning. My name is Annie Gunner-Logan. I'm the Chief Exec of the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland, which represents the third sector care providers in Scotland. If you were here yesterday, you would have had the opportunity to see some of the really kind of cutting-edge, sharp-end work that our members are doing on digital and tech. And I have to say, like my first comment here is to put on record our appreciation to the organising team here today, because this was a really inclusive event for health and social care. And it was terrific to see that. There was somebody tweeted yesterday, delighted to see these organisations are now represented and indeed leading discussions, showcasing the innovative work they've long been undertaking. And it wasn't me that tweeted that. It was somebody quite independent of us, but it was brilliant to see. I think there are some challenges for our sector, and we might get into those a little bit in the conversation that we're about to have. I think this strategy, the digital health and care strategy, and this conference had placed a real emphasis on collaboration. Those who are involved in social care will know that one of the kind of dominant dynamics is competition, where organisations are kind of encouraged to compete with each other rather than to collaborate, and I think we need to break through that if we're going to make advances in digital. There's obviously, I come from the voluntary sector, so I would talk about money, wouldn't I? But there's an issue here about investment, and I'm not talking about putting pots of money into individual organisations because they're doing that themselves. It's how do we invest in the connectivity of what they are doing with the wider system and with each other and with the broader platforms that we're developing. And more generally, I think, just how do we keep our focus on the real objective of digital and tech in health and social care? And it kind of reminds me of some of the debates we had about personalisation back in the day. If you do the right thing, giving people more choice and control, you're probably going to end up saving some money along the way. But if your starting point is saving money, you really risk doing the wrong thing. I think that's all I want to say as introductory remarks. I shall introduce Malcolm, who's going to say a couple of words, and then we have our guests with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much. Annie, I think one of the words that was used in that animation was that of collaboration. And I think with everybody that we've got here in the room today, there's a real leadership challenge about how we work together to deliver that digital connectivity. But I think about collaboration as well. We've got a real opportunity today with Ms. Freeman, the Cabinet Secretary of Health and Sport, and Councillor Currie from COSLA, the Health and Sport spokesperson, to really demonstrate the collaboration that's going on between Scottish Government and COSLA. And this is one of a number of areas that we're working with COSLA, our public health reforms, our digital reforms, and our social care reforms. So that partnership, that collaboration is really, really important. I think the second thing I want to say is that there's a number of reforms that are going on in health and social care right now, and I guess I'm really keen to see that we increase the pace and scale of those reforms. And I think digital reform is one of a number of really high priority areas. So the integration of health and social care, I think we're well down the track with that. We're not going back on it. And I think we want to see that increased at pace and scale. And I think digital plays a really important role in all of that. The same applies to our mental health reforms as well, and also all of the workforce reforms that are going in on the back of it. And of course, this is needed more than ever before because of the rising demands that we've got in our population. I think probably two other things to say, and then I'll shut up. One is the importance of the principle of place. So how do we design things for individual communities with all of the third sector organisations, the statutory organisations working together to provide solutions for people in communities that are really going to work for them. And I think the final thing I want to say is that certainly in Scottish Government, we see the need to enhance the leadership of our digital agenda. And we've invited Caroline Lamb, the Chief Executive of NHS Education for Scotland, to be seconded into government to be our first standalone Director of Digital Reform. And of course, we heard from Jonathan Cameron, the Deputy Director, here yesterday. So I think a very tangible commitment from Scottish Government to increase the pace and scale of the reforms that were taking place. But I think that's all I want to say now. And I'd really like to invite Ms. Freeman, our Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, and Councillor Stuart Currie, up to the, I was going to call it a stage. It's not really a stage. Come and have a seat here.
Good morning. Morning.
And how we're planning to run this part of the session is really that Annie and I will lead off with some questions for Ms. Freeman and Councillor Currie, and then we'll have an opportunity to open us up to the wider audience and give you the opportunity to ask some questions and get some conversation going. So if I can maybe just lead off, and a question for both Ms. Freeman and Councillor Currie. I suppose there's a lot of really clever technology around and lots of technical solutions that are available. How do we make sure that we really put citizens and communities at the heart of this, and that we use the digital reforms to really enhance people's ability to live in communities, live in their homes, and to keep them out of hospital? How do we harness this technology?
Okay, can I start?
Can I?
Thank you very much. So first of all, let me say I'm really pleased to be here. Let me apologise to you that I need to leave around 10 o'clock, and the reason for that is my boss stands up on her pins at 12 noon for FMQs, and if I'm not sitting beside her, I'm in serious trouble. More than I might be at the minute. Anyway, that would be serious trouble if I'm not there. So I think there's a couple of things I'd want to say, Malcolm. One of the things that struck me in some recent survey work was, in a sense, how much further ahead of us the public are, the general public, in their expectation that we should be using digital technology to provide healthcare to them and support them in managing their own conditions and finding out credible, reliable information that they want to know about their own health or the health of members of their family. So I think that in many, many ways, the public is a bit ahead of us and are not going to be anything other than about time too when we start using more of this. But the other thing I think that counters that is that we absolutely mustn't lose the importance of human contact and human conversation. Digitally enabled care, the key word is enabled, because otherwise what people will fear is that we're going to start replacing human beings with bits of kit and apps. So I think that as long as we remember that it is enabled, that it is there to enable person-centered care, then we introduce it and deliver it in a way that is centered around what makes sense for the person. Colleague earlier in opening talked about, I think, one of the poster winners around the blood pressure monitoring. I had the opportunity to be in a primary care centre in East Kilbride and to see that happening. And what struck me was not only how much that was welcomed by the patients who were involved in it. They could be taking their own blood pressure at home at a time that was convenient to them while they were getting the wains, while they were shouting at the wains to get ready for school and whatever else they were doing. They were reminded of it by text. They put their result through to be monitored in the centre. And they were, as part of that, linked to the local authorities' health and exercise services, and would go on, would join up and get personal exercise and so on, see their blood pressure alter, understand what difference exercise and diet was making to that. And many, many, many of them, this is the really good bit, once they were signed off, if you like, their blood pressure was okay, no medication, it had passed lips, it had all been done by this way. Once they were signed off, they continued to do the exercise, or they continued with the change in their diet. Now that's a big deal because they felt they were in charge. So it has loads of opportunities to us as long as we focus it around what is right for the individual and where they are and what they're able to do.
Councillor Currie.
Yep, well, I agree with that, so that's a good start to the morning. So I always, I've got shin pads on just in case, but I think what's really important is that actually people tell us what they want and what they need to improve their lives and for the lives of the people that they work with, their families, their friends and their communities. I think, and I've said this before, all too often we get carers in the room and we say to them, well, here's what we're going to give you. And they say, well, actually, I don't need that. Here's what I need to make my life better for the life of my the individual or family member. And I think that's really important because actually sometimes it would surprise you the answers that people give you when you actually ask them, what do you need? And they'll tell you what they need, and it'll be different from what you were prepared or thought you were going to give. And that's really important. I think technology plays a part in that now. Recently I bought one of these watches that tells me if I fall over, it's not good news. It tells me about blood pressure, it tells me about everything, it tells me about, you know, heart rhythms. It even I'm reliably informed that it tells the time as well. But so you have all these things here, and yet when I went to buy this particular watch, I went upstairs to the Apple shop in Edinburgh, and you have all these genius bars where people are trying to find out how to use their iPhone and their iPad. There was very few of the tables had anyone under the age of 65 at these tables because things have changed. I don't know if anybody's been watching the documentary series recently on BBC Scotland about the Scottish Ambulance Service. It's been really interesting, I think one of the most latest ones. There was a lady in Aberdeenshire who was 103 and she felt a bit unwell. The ambulance came, she was going to hospital and she dispatched her son, before the ambulance sped off, she dispatched her son, who was about 70 odd, to go into the house to get her iPad because she uses the iPad every day to read the newspapers. And she enjoys that and she does a bit of telephone, Skype conversation with some of her friends if they're not at the lunch club. And I just thought to myself, there's someone who's saying, actually, that's of use to me in everyday life, and therefore I'm using technology. And all too often, in my experience, all too often, things like telecare, it's almost like, well, you've lost your care package, but here we have telecare. Actually, what we've got to get into, and it's what the Cabinet Secretary was saying about this hybrid approach, that it can't be either or. It's how it works well for you. For some people, having someone overnight with them is absolutely what's required, and that's down to that discussion. But for some people it's not. It's about reassurance, it's about guidance, it's about supervision. And actually, we talk about individuals who are in receipt of care and digital services, but often we have to take not just the heart and minds of those people, but their families and friends and carers too. Because there's a huge, everybody knows, there's a huge guilt trip that happens if someone ends up in a care home. Their family and friends feel terrible about it. They feel they should be the ones, rightly so, that are given the care, and they feel as if somehow they're lesser because they've not done that. And I think we have to build people's confidence that the use of digital care and digital equipment is not only something that we're going to just give you because to fill a gap, but it's something you would want because it's better, or it's certainly no worse than what you would have experienced. And actually the final thing is that I spoke to a GP in the Highlands recently who told me that the last thing he wants is some of his 80-odd-year-old patients getting up, getting ready, getting dressed, wandering down to the surgery when actually they've got a 75-inch TV in their house with a camera stuck on the top of it. They can press a button and they can get through to the surgeon and have that face-to-face conversation. And then a decision can be made whether somebody needs to come out. So that's a two-stage conversation, rather than this always thing, somebody phones 999, somebody arrives, and it's a crisis. It's actually about a part of everyday life.
Thanks. Our interviewees have deftly anticipated the issue that I was going to raise, which is very helpful. So I just want to kind of probe it a bit more. And I suppose it's about the kind of ethical issues in relation to digital and tech in care. Cabinet Secretary, you mentioned the importance of using tech to enhance care rather than to replace the human interaction, and Councillor Currie talked about overnight support, and I think that's a very good example of this. If you were here yesterday, people in the room, you would have heard from a number of voluntary organisations about the work they're doing to redesign overnight support using tech, and one of the big messages that came out from that was this is something that takes time because you need to work with people in order to do that rather than impose it. So I guess my question is, if we also have an imperative which is about pace and scale and needing to get on, how do we balance that with the need to work with people at their own pace? Because I think that is actually quite a challenge for organisations.
Well, I'm actually genuinely not sure it is binary like that. When I talk about increasing the pace and scale in terms of integration, what I'm particularly talking about is where we have examples of practice that works, stopping talking about sharing that practice and just lifting it and doing it. That's what I mean about pace and scale. And if we'd had a bit less sharing good practice and a bit more implementing good practice, we would have got to the pace and some of the scale that would make me happier. And I think, generally speaking, make our citizens happier. That doesn't mean that you don't work with where people are. And I think I can think of, and I'm sure Stuart here can think of it as well, loads of examples where local authorities and healthcare providers are perfectly able and capable to do both at the same time. So I think we need to be really careful in all of this discussion that we don't frame it as, well, you either do that or you do that, right? Because I don't think it has to be that way. I think it is entirely possible to, for example, have a much more improved system, some of which we see in some of our integration authorities, of, for example, delayed discharge, which also uses digitally enabled care with people at home at a level and a point that suits and works for that individual. And we could take you there right this minute. There's more than one example of that. So both are happening together, where there is no delayed discharge coming from those integration authorities in terms of what's happening in the hospital. And the thing about delayed discharge that we need to remember is it's not about government stats and whether or not somebody like me gets a hard time. It's about the fact that the longer people stay in hospital when they don't need clinically to be there, it's not the right place for them to be. And if they're elderly and frail, their condition will deteriorate. Their confidence will deteriorate. So we need to get people home or to that homely setting as quickly as possible after they don't need the clinical care that the hospital has provided. And digital can help with that, but the thing that helps most is the conversation, which is exactly what Stuart said. The conversation that says, what do you need to live confidently and independently? Some of that will be digital, some of that will be the people who turn up at your door, family, friends, or carers who help you with different things.
Yeah, and I think actually we need to try and move away from this kind of myth, really, that somehow digital is a cheaper option.
Absolutely.
And therefore that's why everybody rushes towards things.
Yes.
Actually, in my experience, it's about having that discussion about what's the best option. And the best option isn't always the cheapest option. Sometimes it is the right option to have someone physically there, but sometimes it's not. And actually, sometimes having someone there is that building of confidence, those building blocks that then gets you on that journey to digital care. Because I think if you start the conversation that here's what we're going to take away and here's what we're going to give you instead, I think you've got no chance. I think it's everybody knows that. It's so difficult to then get into a positive discussion about what's the best option that can happen. And in terms of things like, what we have to do in health and social care in terms of integration, first of all, when people are able to return home, that needs to happen. We need to stop people getting to hospital in the first place. That's about the prevention. And I think it's amazing how often you get in a room and everybody really has the solutions. What the job is about leadership, about making sure that happens. That's absolutely crucial. I'm all for post-it notes and flip charts. I think they're a great idea. But I think I've been at enough things where everybody agrees that it's a brilliant idea, and if we could just do this, it would be marvellous. And it doesn't happen. And the trick is, why doesn't it happen? Now that's about leadership from national and local government. It's about saying, actually, what are the barriers? You tell us what are the barriers, because we don't understand what they are. And if there are barriers that can be removed, they should be removed. But what we should never settle for is somehow we elevate our issues and problems higher than the best outcomes for individuals, their families, their friends and their communities. Nothing should be elevated higher than that. And I think that's the kind of centre of gravity that I think everybody does have. But it's really important that we don't always see digital and telecare and doing things differently as somehow being the cheap option, and that's why we're using it. It needs to be the better option, because that's how you win hearts and minds. That's how you take people with you, because people will come to you and say, what do you mean? I have to go and see someone in a council office. What do you mean? Why can't I use this phone? And that's the tipping point. We need to get to a point where people are saying to us, they want the convenience, they want the instant results, they want it, at midnight, they want to be able to contact someone and get some reassurance about some of the concerns they have, and that goes for their family and friends as well.
So I think you've both said very powerfully and very eloquently about having the person at the heart of all of this, and designing services, designing technology to keep them in their communities, to support them. You made, Stuart, the point about leadership. Now, in this room, we've got leaders from all over the NHS, from social care, from academia, from the third sector. What's your leadership ask of the people in this room today?
Well, I think the ask is ensuring that we deliver. Leadership is about sticking your chin out, and I say that as a politician, Cabinet Secretary as well. I think you lead with your chin, that's what you do as a politician. And what I realised many years ago as a councillor is that actually, once you realise it's always your fault, then you sleep a wee bit easier at night. No matter what, it's going to be your fault. So that may be different in the Scottish Government, but certainly in local government, it's always our fault. But actually, it's about leadership isn't just about, I say this about making speeches and then getting a warm fuzzy feeling and then going off somewhere else and saying, well, that was nice. And then you come back around 6 months later and you have the same speech and the same discussion. And I'm sure there's people in this room who have been at lots of conferences, lots of discussions, and think, God, here we go again. It's like a feeling of deja vu. But actually, leadership is about saying to the Cabinet Secretary, to myself, and to anyone who will listen, particularly in leadership positions at local and national government, here's what we need. And being tough enough and bright enough and bold enough to say, here's what we require, and putting the issue back to us and saying, well, why can't that be delivered? I think that is leadership. It's about saying, here's our experience, here's what we think we can deliver. Because like the Cabinet Secretary, things do need to happen at the right pace. But they need to happen at pace, because I don't think people are prepared to sit back any longer and just say, oh, well, we'll just wait for something to come along. That's not going to be good enough, and it's not good enough for many people in our communities.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I think I agree with Stuart. It is all of those things. I'd add a couple of other things. I think leadership is about being honest. So when people come and say, this is what I want to do and this is why I want to do it, and I want you to help me make that happen, if that's not possible, you need to be honest with people and tell them why. Leadership isn't about keeping secrets or thinking that people don't need to know what your thinking is. So there will be some obstacles that you will come to me and say, we need that out the way. And my answer will be, I can't do all of that. Here's why I can't do all of that, but here's what I can do. So leadership is not just saying either yes, absolutely, we'll get rid of that, or no, it can't happen. If you're saying no, it can't happen, you need to, if you're a leader, say why not, and what could you do instead? Could we take steps towards that place? And the other thing about leadership is taking people with you. And that means that, so every single person in this room is a leader. Leaders don't come with titles. Leaders are what's in you and the drive that you have to make a difference. And there'll be every single person in this room wants to make a difference in your job. You get up every morning, you go to your work, you want to do the best job that you can. That's being a leader. Can you take people with you then? Can you convince people that the road you want to go down is one that they want to come with you on? And then collectively work out how are you going to get there? And go to the decision makers. So Stuart and I aren't more leaders than you are. But what we can do is make decisions at certain levels. So you need to then come to us and say, this is what we need. This is what we want you to do. These are the barriers and the obstacles that we need you to get out of our road. And then you should expect us to have an honest, straight conversation with you about what is possible, what isn't possible, what we can do, and how long we're going to take to do it. That is collective leadership, and every single one of you in this room is a leader.
Okay. Just conscious of the time, Annie, do you have a final
Well,
question?
just to pick up on that point, you're asking what is the ask of political leaders as well as what is your ask of us, and it was something that
I didn't ask what you were asking me.
referred
But
to.
if you insist.
I will, if you'll let me. One of the things I raised in my introductory remarks was the message about collaboration. That this isn't about individual organisations going and buying something that's being offered to them as a solution, which then doesn't talk to somebody else's solution and so on.
Indeed.
So one of the big asks, I think, is how are we able to support that collaboration centrally rather than having everybody kind of run down their own rabbit hole and develop their own idea, and wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Excuse me. So in terms of the work that Malcolm touched on earlier, I think in Scottish Government in health and social care, and in collaboration with our colleagues in COSLA and with yourselves, we are beginning to pull it together in identifying, certainly we will do that with Carolyn's leadership and others, in giving a leadership role at that level. I think that is a big deal, actually, and it's a big signal.
Agreed.
Then pulling together all the various initiatives and bits of work that are going on and deciding what are the most important. I'll be perfectly honest with you, when I was appointed as Cabinet Secretary, and I looked at, you get shed loads of briefing. I have to say, it all comes to you in paper, by the way. You get shed loads of briefing, and I was looking at the digital stuff, and what I thought was, there's lots of stuff going on here. Where is the strategic approach? And how does that align with what I am saying is my strategic priorities for transformation in health and social care? And I think that is one of the most important things we need to do. And that might mean that there are some things that people are currently absolutely committed to, really enthusiastic about, that I am going to say that needs to wait because we need to do this first. And make logical decisions about how we undertake our infrastructure investment, our development of digital in a way that maximizes our chance of meeting those strategic priorities. And the core thing at the strategic priorities are people. Everything has to be about, does that make the delivery of healthcare more effective for those who are delivering it and those who are receiving it? Does that make social care much closer to helping people live as independently and confidently as they want to? If the answer is yes, it does those things, then that's where we should be going.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think it just I'll be brief on this, but I think I agree with that, but I think it underlines this whole system approach. People talk about the whole system approach, but we've got to stop talking about it. It's nice to talk about it, but we've got to start delivering it. That's really important. And actually, whether it be public health, whether it be mental health, whether it be health and social care integration, NHS, a whole range of stakeholders, we've got to deliver. And that's really important. I don't think the luxury, if it ever was a luxury, is there anymore of doing something and say, well, that didn't work, we'll just try something else for a few years. Actually, it'd be better to get it right first time. And I think there's a huge expectation from individuals and their families and friends to ensure we get things as right as they possibly can be first time. And that's about taking people with us. It's about making sure we do the legwork to get it right first time. But it is absolutely about a whole system approach. And there's nothing more frustrating than everybody's talking around each other rather than talking to each other and delivering results for individuals.
Okay. So I think that brings us neatly to 10 o'clock. Can I ask you to join me in thanking the Cabinet Secretary and Councillor Currie for giving up of their time. I think we've had some very clear and powerful messages coming through there this morning, and I hope that sets us up really well for the rest of the day. So Councillor Currie and Ms Freeman, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The next session is Chris. Where's Chris? There's Chris. I'm going to introduce Chris Yu to you. Chris is the Executive Director for Technology and Public Policy at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Chris's work focuses on improving the dialogue between those changing the world with new technologies, that is you, and those seeking to respond to it with policy and regulation, which is the people we've just heard from, I guess. So based in Edinburgh, Chris is a member of the advisory board at Digital Leaders. He's a curator of the AI website Deep Index. He's a trustee of Enable Scotland, fantastic third sector organisation. He was previously a general manager at Uber, and he's held senior roles at a number of public, private and third sector organisations, including SCVO, Policy Exchange, McKinsey & Co, HM Treasury and the Cabinet Office. So we're very interested to hear what you've got to say, Chris, and we'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. Just give me 2 seconds to put some water. Okay, so thank you all for having me here this morning. Really looking forward to talking with you about technology and how it's changing the world and how all of you have a part to play in helping respond and making sure that it benefits as many people as possible. And yeah, particularly excited to do this morning in an environment where we can really talk about the impact that technology has on people and make sure that we thread this through everything that happens in the public sector as well as the way that it's changing the wider economy. So look, what I'm going to do is just try to take a step back and give you my perspective on how all of this is playing out in terms of the big structural changes in the environment that we're operating in. And I think a lot of the things that we'll talk about have been echoed in the comments already this morning. But I'll give you a view maybe from 30,000 feet, and then we can zoom in as we go further in the day into how this affects some of the more granular conversations that we're having. This, for context, is the mission that my team at the Institute has. So we are all about equipping the world's leaders to master the revolution in technology. We think this is the biggest thing that is happening in the world at the moment, and it's the single biggest thing that politicians and leaders in all sectors need to understand. And we think it's important that this is about both accessing the benefits but also mitigating the risks. Right? So a bunch of things in technology have gone wrong or have been difficult, and those have to be dealt with. But it would be a real tragedy if we spent all of our time focused on the negatives and we never spent any time on the positives, because the truth is technology has the potential to be transformational for people in their daily lives, to address the concerns and the issues and the challenges they have and fulfill their aspirations. And a political conversation which is relentlessly about the bad stuff doesn't serve any of us well. So look, I'm going to just set the scene with a couple of things that I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with, and I won't labour too many of these points, but you will have heard people talking about what's happening at the moment as a revolution. I did it just now. And a lot of people talk about this current phase as a fourth industrial revolution. So, back in the 18th century, the first industrial revolution around mechanization and steam, second industrial revolution around mass production and assembly lines, a third industrial revolution to do with the beginnings of automation and microprocessors and so on. But what we're living through now, in terms of the connectivity between data, devices, people, the physical world and the online world coming together, it's something that we've never had to deal with before. And it seems to us cuts through pretty much every policy topic, every aspect of service delivery. And the really frightening thing, and exciting, but I think mostly frightening thing, is how quickly this is changing. And you will have heard lots of people talk about exponential change. You will have seen things like Moore's Law and all these kind of phenomena in technology where things tend to move not in a linear way, but in a much more rapid way. And as human beings, this is really difficult to get to grips with, because we mostly form our expectations about the future to do with what's happened recently, and we tend to intuitively think of things moving in straight lines. And when things are actually growing very explosively, it can be very quick to get outside of our control. And so, where we think things are going to be versus where they actually turn out can be massively different. Some people in tech talk about this phenomenon as the singularity, right? This idea that we are hurtling towards a point where technology growth is so fast that it gets to a point where it's beyond our comprehension or human control. And if you believe some of the more outlandish folk in this arena, then we're on for a world where computers outpace human beings and we can all pack up and go home, or maybe the computers won't let us go home, I'm not sure. But I tend to be a bit more optimistic than that. But we do have to get our heads around the fact this is changing fast, and that the pace of response required in policy and institutions needs to match it. If you think about the first industrial revolution, which had implications and changed politics and institutions over 50 or 100 years, and we're in a world now where the change is happening 10 times faster, but can our institutions, can our policymakers, can others move at that sort of speed? And I think it's an open question, but it's on all of us to try to make it happen. So I'm going to give you, I guess the bill on this was, a few lessons from the foothills. So I've got kind of 3 takeaways for you from all of this. And all of them have been mentioned this morning already. But the first is, through all of this, you've got to remember that it's about solving for user needs, right? It's about people, not about technology for its own sake. But this, I think, has a particular manifestation in the modern environment. So, and the thing for me about the internet is that it has taken us from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance. And when that happens, that radically changes where the locus of power is in the economy, in society. So this, you can go and read about this stuff later. This is a chart about Facebook. You could say the same about Google, but the point is that once upon a time before the internet, when there was a scarcity of content, power in the system mostly rested with traditional gatekeepers, newspaper editors, for example, broadcast channel editors, the people who decided what we saw, what we read, and they were the ones that had a hold on what we talked about and how we formed our opinions. And the internet turned this on its head because suddenly everybody can put up a web page. And then once things like Facebook appear, or MySpace if you're a MySpace person, then everybody has an ability to publish to a wide audience. And in this environment, the balance of power shifts not from the editors, but to the places where that let you aggregate all of that demand and interest and package it in a way which makes it easy for you to engage with. And so it's not surprising that Google controls search and Facebook has a pretty dominant position in terms of social media. But it's interesting that what they're doing is about a real focus on what their users need as opposed to what their suppliers want, right? If you try to deal with Google, you will have discovered that actually you can optimize your page and you can buy ads, but actually you can't really broker much with them about how they behave, right? You do it on their terms, because what they're really focused on is how do I answer questions for people who want the results on search. And similarly on Facebook, it's all about how do I make this as good an experience as possible for the people who open their phone and want to look at what's happening on the news feed. Think about a company like Netflix, right? So here we are, Netflix with 100 million subscribers worldwide. What's going on and why has this absolutely obliterated linear broadcast? And I think a lot of the answer is to do with giving people what they need. And it's partly about the content, but it's also about the convenience, right? The job of Netflix is to give you something to watch when you flop on the couch at the end of the day. And it turns out having, a gazillion different options on tap is better and more convenient than fishing around traditional broadcast channels for what might happen to be on at this particular point in time. So all of these phenomena tend to be about how do you think about the user and build, use technology to build a product around them rather than building the technology for its own sake. But it's not just these big American companies that can do this. This is an example called GovChat, which is in South Africa. It's about how do you help citizens to engage with local and national government? How do you talk about your satisfaction with your local hospital, or report a pothole, or all these sorts of things that we need to do in our lives? And what's really cool about this is that it takes this idea of working with user needs to its natural conclusion, which is they have an app and a website, but mostly what they do is interface with things that you already use. So you can talk to your political representatives and government officials on WhatsApp or via text message, because that's where you're having the conversation. And that is much more natural for people and slots inside their life and the way that they tend to work and behave. This is the Enable Scotland Enable Me travel app, which it says on the screen, finalist in the Scottish Charity Awards. We did, of course, win the demonstrating digital category. But this was, again, it goes to show that actually it's not about having the flashiest, most advanced technology. It's about actually building a product which helps people do what they need to do. So the travel app helps people plan their journeys, deal with anxiety and so on whilst they're on public transport or getting from A to B. And in those situations makes a real difference for the people that need to use it. There's not a ton of big data or artificial intelligence behind it. It just does the job that people need it to do, and can be incredibly powerful for that group. And this is it, right? Like, the question is, through all of this, what is the job to be done? I'm sure everybody in this room has used Google Maps. It gets you from A to B, right? You don't go onto Google Maps because it's kind of fun to browse around and see what's what, although Street View can be an incredible time sink sometimes. But mostly it's about, I need to get to this place, and how do I get there? And what Google has done that I think is really powerful is then start to bring in all the different aspects of answering that question for you. So it's not just how do I walk there or cycle there, but what combination of public transport could do this for me? How much will it cost if I leave at different times of day, so on and so forth. But it really is the, I think, epitome of this sort of product. And it's kind of phenomenal that we have this and we take it for granted. And if you ask people, if you took it away, how much would you pay to get something like Google Maps back? The answer is actually often quite a lot of money. So when you can execute a job well, it can be very, very attractive. I'm sure lots of you have seen these before. The thing that I think is interesting, and the reason I put this up, is that in the context of this discussion about how do you meet user needs, Jeff Bezos writes a letter to his shareholders every year. And not this year, but last year, one of the things he talked about, he said, the thing he loves about his customers is that they are what he calls divinely discontent, by which he means their expectations are not static, right? Their expectations are continuously increasing. And what we thought of as, magical and phenomenal one day becomes normal the next, and then we take it for granted. And I think it's important for the conversation in terms of health and social care and public service delivery more broadly. I think there's often this kind of thinking when we're talking about technology in the public sector that there's a level that we've got to get to, and we know we're behind and we're kind of chasing towards it, and if we just keep working and keep building, we're sort of approaching digital, and then we're done, right? We've made it, we've built the thing for people. And of course, the truth is people's expectations are racing ahead. And in this environment, we're never done. So you think you've built the app or delivered the digital service, and you think, I've completed the spec that I was set a couple of years ago. But of course, out there in the real world, what people now want and expect has changed again. And you're continuously chasing that. And I think getting into the mindset of continuously growing and improving and thinking about actually what do people want today and tomorrow is really important. So that's one. Second thing to talk about is connectedness, and we heard a little bit earlier about collaboration and the importance of doing a lot of this together. One of the cool things about technology is that it turns out you don't need to do everything on your own anymore. That if you're starting a small business, or you're starting a charity, or you're thinking about spinning something up in the public sector, there's this incredible array of tools that you can knit together to get the job done. And it's a phenomenal opportunity if you're able to leverage that rather than thinking that you have to do everything yourself. And I'm sure lots of you have used some of the products on the screen here. One of the interesting kind of ramifications of this is that lots of things that we used to own have disappeared into things that we just consume as a service. Effectively, we rent them, right, rather than owning them. Somebody said recently, when talking about the world we live in, everything is amazing, but nothing is ours. And I think that's kind of interesting that you think about music or movies or software or any of these sorts of phenomena. Spotify up on the screen for those of you who use Spotify. Incredible ability to listen to any track on the planet anywhere you are, but you no longer own a collection of records or CDs or tapes or whatever your preferred format is. And this is just something that I think we're all wrestling with. It has enormous opportunities in terms of helping people to save costs, and it can be enormously beneficial for the environment in some sectors. But it does change the nature of an organization and how you think about what you're here to do and who you need to work with in order to get things done. And it changes the broader environment that we experience technology in. So, we talk a lot about, in the past, about the shift from computers to these sorts of things. Right? And I'm sure everybody here has got a mobile phone with them, and maybe some people have got two. But this is not the end state. It's a big push now, as I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with, into voice assistants, what the technologists call ambient computing, right? This idea that actually the world around us is suffused with data and technology, and you're in an environment where actually, you can ask and get an answer, you can book a haircut or whatever it is you need to do, in a way which doesn't involve such a deliberate interaction with a piece of hardware. And I think it's interesting to ponder this in the context of the discussions today. You had the animation earlier with some of the different types of technology in it, and robotics and devices and so on. But then, the question again is, how does this change in a world where, people don't think about the technology as being such a distinct thing anymore? It's just there. You can just ask. And if you can just ask, then when you do ask, who's on the other end, and how do I know who I'm talking to and whether I can trust it? And that begs this question, what on earth do we mean by things like services or data or infrastructure in this environment? And I think this is one of the arenas, particularly in health and social care, where there's a really important discussion to be had about the data that underpins a lot of the services that are being delivered, about the connectivity between different parts of government and the public sector and the third sector and companies, and understanding actually, from your perspective, what are the things that you can provide that let other people build incredible products and services and meet people's needs without you having to do all of it? And how do you share and collaborate in a way which protects privacy but also enables innovation? And this debate is live in government at the moment about how do you build platforms, which services belong in the state versus in the third sector. It's not resolved, but I think there's a lot of good practice happening, and it's important that we are thinking about it and learning from each other. And all of this, I think, sometimes gets summed up in these sorts of pictures, which are a good, way to think about what's happening. That we have steps. We've managed the step from a world of high centralization, where you have command and control from the center, and a single point of authority tells everybody how it's going to be, and we all fall into line, to a more decentralized environment. And we've had, different forms of devolution and different ways of kind of pushing power out from the center to more, local control. You have that kind of decentralized take on things. And then the question, I think, for the future is, what does a more distributed model of participation, public service delivery, ownership look like? I'm going to try to mention the word blockchain only once. But, it's an interesting concept, right? How do we think about notions of trust, and how do we build systems which put control in different places or have different sets of incentives that replace traditional forms of governance? And if you can go there, then what does it mean for the way that we organize our institutions? What does it mean for the balance of control between public and private? And you know, all of this can be frightfully technical, but actually when you step back, it's really about how do we organize ourselves to make the best use of the technology that exists in the modern world. We can do things now that we couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago, and it's incumbent upon us to figure out how we do that, not just to make a few technologists phenomenally rich, but actually you know, reshape the conversation and give people a better sense of you know, engagement around the things that matter in their lives. And the same goes for the way that we interact, that actually there's collaboration. Some of it is to do with the software and how it plugs together and how we reuse data and so on and so forth. But a lot of it is about, you know, how you think about the connections between people and how do we, you know, ensure that, you know, you're making the best use of a situation where you've got different people to turn to for advice. You've got the ability to look information up online. You've got communities of interest and a practice springing up in places that were hard to coordinate before, but now are relatively easy. You know, one of the most useful things for me locally is a Facebook group that has all of my neighbours on it, right? And we talk about stuff that matters to our street. And, you know, yeah, we had Neighbourhood Watch before, and there were different ways of doing this, and our interaction isn't just online, but it opens up a new way of connecting, which has been really, really powerful. And then the last bit of this, so lesson number 3, in my humble opinion, all technology is political. And this really matters because this entire environment, this entire debate is at risk of being dominated by people with whizzy technology and big solutions, which may well be fantastic, but you know, I kind of think they have to be part of a conversation in society about what we want to see and the kind of world that we want to live in. There is no doubt that you know, technology is overturning everything. You kind of look at modern politics and the state of social media, and it's pretty obvious that something is happening that we've not dealt with before. And you know, even this election versus the last one, you know, it already feels very different. But it's a symptom of a wider issue, which is technology has changed the locus of power, like we were talking about earlier, and that is an inherently political thing to happen. And you know, if I were to ponder, you know, what's the source of lots of the grief that we have about the way that technology is impacting the world and disrupting things, it's a lot to do with enormous power without an awful lot of legitimacy attached to it. And so you have big companies and smaller companies and other organizations making decisions that affect all of our lives, but without an awful lot of input. And I think it's only a matter of time before this starts to give, and we realize that actually, you know, we have to get a proper political and policy understanding of what's happening in order to make sure that people are in control of our technological destiny and not just the folk in Silicon Valley. And here's a good example of, you know, how this can be difficult. So some of you might recognize this is the DeepMind. DeepMind's an AI company based in London but owned by Google. This is the DeepMind Streams app, which they deployed a couple of years ago at the Royal Free. So it pulls together patient data. It gives clinicians early warning, I think, of kidney disease. In principle, a phenomenal use of the technology to save clinicians time, to improve outcomes for patients, but also got embroiled in a big you know, bust up with the hospital and the ICO around how data was shared between a public sector organization, a big American company, and were patients, you know, properly informed, and could they be sure that you know, this was what was intended. And I think it goes to show that you can have great intentions and you can build good technology, but if you skip the part around the conversation with the people that you're trying to engage with, then there can be enormous blowback. And you know, the real tragedy for lots of this stuff is that if you continue to get that wrong, you know, we risk destroying so much trust that actually, you know, real you know, transformational improvements through technology are hard to realize because we've burned all of the public confidence that we can execute it well and do so in a way which you know, is really about them and not about anybody else. So I think, you know, a lot of this comes down to, you know, how do you have a conversation not just amongst the technologists and frankly not just amongst the people in this room, but, you know, with everybody involved in this, around what we want to see and how you balance a lot of the difficult trade-offs that are inherent in this environment. I think there are a set of people who would like to have you think that the technology is wonderful, that if we just implement it, we can save a ton of money, make everybody's lives better, and that's unambiguously a good thing. Look, I am, on balance, pretty optimistic about the role of technology, but I am also a realist that thinks that there are a whole stack of difficult trade-offs that we have to make. That this is mostly about where do you situate yourself in a difficult grey area, whether it's to do with data sharing versus privacy, or in other arenas, how much do you think about promoting competition versus safety and security? And none of this is easy, but what is certain is that you can't make a lot of these decisions for people, right? We have to figure out, as a society, as a community, what do we want to make of some of these difficult challenges? How do we want to balance them, and what matters to us together? If you think about data sharing in medicine and artificial intelligence, there's a very strong argument that more data sharing and better ability to interrogate that would enable you to advance the science and the technology, which has potentially radical impacts for how we diagnose certain diseases and potentially cure them. On the other hand, you're asking people to give up very personal data, which maybe they wouldn't consent to, or they have concerns about how the state might use it or how it might be passed to other people. You can't answer that for people, right? You have to take them on the conversation. You have to be honest about the trade-offs and the risks and the opportunities, and then you have to facilitate that dialogue. And I think all of us in this room have a part to play in making that happen. And it's important that that conversation is as inclusive as possible. And I think one of the interesting things about technology is the way that it has enabled more people of different backgrounds and in different circumstances to participate in conversations, to find people going through similar things or with similar challenges, and figuring out a way to fold that into this conversation so that it's not just the elite talking to the elite, but actually genuinely realizes the possibility to bring everybody into the discussion is going to be really, really important. So a couple of just reflections on what maybe some of this means for health and social care policy. For me, I think there's three things. So number one, we've got to get the basics right. In this world of rapidly rising expectations, people expect things to work and be convenient, and so lots of the things which maybe would have seemed like a stretch 5 years ago, we now just need to get sorted, whether it's the ability to book a GP appointment online or to have electronic patient records or whatever else. This sort of stuff I think people will be taking as read. There's a question about how much we try to do ourselves and how much we work with partners and collaborators and others to solve some of these problems. We can't do it all on our own, the same way that Apple didn't write every app on your iPhone. What you can do is build an environment where many, many people can get involved and be creative based on some common foundations. It's important that we have this conversation in society about how we want to balance this stuff and what matters and how we're going to work together to get there, and frankly, what will it cost and what will it save and everything else, but mostly why, right? Why are we doing this and who will it benefit? And I think ultimately we should be optimistic, right? Like the technology that exists is something that is changing lives in ways that are really sometimes astonishing and difficult to imagine. The idea that a set of kids in China can strap these things on their face and be transported to the other side of the universe or inside the human body is something which we've never had the ability to do before, and opens up education and opens up possibilities in a way which is honestly mind-boggling. And I wouldn't dare to stand here and make predictions about what will happen in the next 5 or 10 years. But I kind of think ultimately technology is driven by people, and that should give us hope, as long as we can control the conversation and make sure that it continues to be about people and not just about the tech for its own sake. So that's my kind of 3 lessons from the foothills, right? Solve for user needs rather than for the needs of your bureaucracy. Embrace this connectedness rather than thinking you need to do everything for yourself. And remember that all of this ultimately is political, right? It's about people, not tech for its own sake. And I think if you hold on to that, then we can have a good set of conversations and get everybody to a good place. So I'm going to leave it there. If you want to read more about the work we're doing, the website is up on the screen now. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks very much, Chris. This is where Malcolm and I come back in, I think. Just a couple of reflections from me on that. I was very struck by what you said about, was it Jeff Bezos said that his customers are divinely discontent? Mm-hmm. And I did wonder whether what the read across there is for health and social care, because in some respects, I think we have a challenge with people having quite low expectations. I mean, satisfaction levels are very high in health and social care more generally, and I'm kind of interested in people's reflections about whether that kind of fits our world or not, and maybe you could say something a little bit more about that. I was also very struck by this concept of everything being amazing, but none of it being ours. And I have been arguing with my husband for a long time about what to do with our record collection. In that respect, all sorts of parameters around that, but I kind of like the Spotify and he likes the stuff, you know. But what I'm thinking about there is it's not ours, but it's definitely theirs. It's definitely Spotify's, you know, it's definitely Netflix's, and it's very, very heavily marketed, and it kind of connects in a little bit with what I was saying earlier about, you know, you're under pressure to buy the solution that is being offered to you. And two questions about that, I guess. You know, how do we avoid buying the wrong one? You know, how do we avoid the Betamax instead of the VHS? But then we're all overtaken by streaming. So the second question there is, and how do we avoid built-in obsolescence, you know, which is built into a lot of the commercial realities around tech, and this is not a sector that can afford to be buying a new mobile phone metaphorically every 6 months. And I was really interested in what you were talking about at the beginning around being focused on the user and how Facebook and Google and social media does that, and connecting it up with your third bit about being political. You know, we know that there is another agenda there. As well, which is about harvesting data and about using that either commercially or politically. And in the health and care strategy for digital here in Scotland, you know, data governance is one of the really big domains. So I wondered if you could kind of unpack that a little bit as well. I don't know, Malcolm, did you have some other?
Yes, and I think just two things from me. One about the issue about who actually owns the data. And secondly, how we make sure that people aren't left behind in this. And I think I'm really thinking about vulnerable people in communities who are less able to use modern technology, and how we make sure that we don't increase health inequalities and we can use technology to reduce health inequalities. So any thoughts you have on that?
Okay. Shall I?
Yep, go for it.
Right, that's a lot. Right, so to take it in order, this question about like expectations and this kind of divine discontent. I'd be interested in views from the room, but I guess I would say, think about something like a GP appointment, right? Where, you know, frankly, I still struggle because it's a case of I get on the phone at 5 minutes to 8 in the morning and hit redial until I get through. And you know, you might take the view that, you know, the goal route is that I can book this appointment digitally and not have to spend my time hammering the speed dial. And then if we do that, then job done, right? We've made the service digital. And then you look at something like GP at Hand from Babylon, which is deployed in London and other places, and you know, park all of the other controversy around it. The point is this idea that actually they've just obsoleted this notion of calling and getting an appointment and showing up, that I can have a GP appear on my smartphone at a time that suits me, means that actually the job's not done, because I can book online, but actually my needs and expectations have shifted. And I don't know what the next thing will be, but I'm pretty confident that actually that's not going to be static either. So I think it's interesting to, and like I say, I think in the conversation, you know, unpacking how that looks in different aspects and different parts of the health and social care system would be really interesting. On this point about buying things that risk becoming obsolete, I think I would push back a bit, right? Like, one of the really powerful things about this environment where everything comes to you as a service rather than something that you buy is that it can change and improve, right? So you think about probably lots of the organizations in this room once upon a time bought Microsoft Office on a CD-ROM or a DVD, and then you installed it, and then it was what it was until it was useless, and then you had to get the next version. And if you're consuming this as a service now, it continuously improves, and every so often they update something and it does a new thing. And so I think if you get that right, you can protect yourself from those sorts of questions, but a lot of it's to do with, have you got the sophistication in the organizations to buy well and understand what you're getting into and what the terms of the contracts are and so on. And it's one of these arenas where, you know, you do need specialists who are able to navigate that environment well. On some of these data points, like who owns it and what are the governance frameworks around it, I think it's really interesting. I think one of the things that I think is really difficult in this arena is there's different sorts of data, right? And so if you think about the sort of online examples that we've been talking about, there's the things that I explicitly tell a platform, be it a public service or social media or whatever else, about myself and the things that I post. There's the things they observe about me because they're looking at how I use the service and what do I linger on and what do I click on. And then there's the things that they infer on the top of that about, you know, maybe based on what I've shared and what I look at, you can try to estimate my demographic profile. And I think you can make the argument that I own the first of those. I think there's, you know, a bit of ambiguity, frankly, about as you go through this web of data that's being curated and generated and inferred, who owns what and where the ownership lies. And so I think wrestling with these sorts of questions is really important, and it's why you can't just leave it to companies or a single institution to make the decision. You've got to have a proper framework of, like you say, governance and regulation around this that understands actually, you know, what's the view that we take in our society about ownership and control and what you should be allowed to do with the data. And, you know, never assume that you can just, you know, decide that on high and everybody will fall into line. And then finally, I think you're absolutely right in terms of making sure that this is as inclusive as possible. You know, all the debates around how do you make sure that you get good internet connectivity out to every community? How do you make sure that you've got products and services that work for people? And it's why, you know, some of the things that I showed on there were a text message interface or something very basic. It's not about building something that's enormously complicated for the sake of it. It's about building something that's straightforward. And I think, there are good examples of technologies where, you know, with the right attention to the user experience and the interface, you can do a lot better than actually having people trying to use a telephone. But it's a case of remembering those people exist and not just designing for, you know, people who are very digitally, you know, savvy and everything else.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Should I click it on? Yeah.
Yep, we're going to
Right.
use the tech now.
Here it goes.
So, are people logged on from yesterday, or who's here new today and hasn't done this before? A couple. Okay, so these are your instructions. You go to www.menti.com, put the code in. So we'll give you a couple of minutes just to figure that out if you've not been here yesterday and this is all new to you. We'll give you a couple of minutes. While you're doing that, we have got a roving mic here actually. So see what I was saying earlier about not replacing people with tech. So I'm a person and I'm not prepared to be replaced by this right now. So
There'll be a robot next year.
Has anybody got an immediate question for Chris that they want to, an issue that they want to raise in relation to what they've heard? That lady there. Can you just say who you are first as well? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Kerry Russell. I lead the Scottish Access Collaborative working for the Scottish Government. That was really interesting, thank you. I often reflect on the fact that whilst we spend a lot of time worrying about excluding people by creating digital solutions and enabling them, I worry that we don't see the fact that we exclude an awful lot of people by using non-digital legacy systems. And I think exactly what you describe about GP appointments. Younger people have got no idea how to interact with a paper-based system and a phone and a door and an appointment, or a lot of them struggle with that. And so what do we need to do to make sure that we're not creating inequalities in younger generation, who are where the big prevention agendas are going to have most impact, and actually who we're going to want to work in our service, and we're not being particularly appealing to them at the moment in terms of being seen as world leaders around digital. In my experience, just would value your views on how we don't miss a whole generation by worrying about a different generation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it highlights this point that we have to think about everybody, and there are so many dimensions to that. So I think I would say a couple of things. One is, when you're doing your user research and everything else, make sure that you've got those groups in the conversation, because you're right, it's easy to overlook because you sort of assume that we're doing a particular thing and everybody younger than whatever age kind of gets it, or and maybe they don't. But the other thing I would say is try to bring those sorts of perspectives into your organisation where you can, right? And I think one of the big challenges you see, not just in this environment, but in public services more broadly, is how do you make sure that it's a place where young people can see that they can make a real difference. And I think they can, right? If you give them the right freedom and they're listened to and they have the right opportunities. But being an environment where it is attractive to come and do that sort of work, and an environment that suits them. So to your point around, and I've seen this with some of the folk that I know working in central government. I've seen great young people come into the civil service, and then you confront them with tools that were state of the art 20 years ago, and they look at it and they say, but this is how I interact with my friends and how I run my life on my phone. I just can't operate in this environment. And you lose them, which is a real tragedy. So I think some of this stuff is about it's that institutional renewal is internal as well as external.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Well, we're starting to see who we've got in the room now, and obviously the biggest cluster there is health, or health and social care partnerships. But I would say if you cluster care, voluntary sector and care provider together, because I suspect some of my colleagues will have wondered which one to press there, that's probably the next biggest jump there. Any reflections on what you're seeing there, Malcolm?
Yeah, I'd like to hear some more questions from the audience. Should I think who else would like to ask a question? Yes.
There's another one for you to do on your phones for the moment. While you're doing that,
question.
I'll come around this gentleman here. Would you like to say who you
is this the answer? Shall I go back?
That's the answer,
David Alexander, MyDex, we're a community interest company working across public service, health and social care here in Glasgow. There's a great phrase, isn't there? It takes a community to raise a child. Well, my experience working on the front line and in practical terms, both as a father of a patient, the son of a patient, and as a patient myself, is it actually takes a community to care for people. And what that means is health, social care, friends and family, voluntary sector. And the fundamental issues come down to friction, effort, risk and cost at the most practical human level for those poor people trying to help people. We don't seem to be addressing that basic issue about making information flow safely and securely across all of those domains. We keep trying to sectorise it and have information government strategies for the NHS or for a particular part of local government. But human beings at the centre means information needs to flow. And I can tell you, my father had a stroke 11 weeks ago, so I'm living the dream right now. 25 inches of paper is the file that goes with him. He's in his 5th location and setting. They constantly try to discharge him into the community, but he has complete fluent aphasia, which for all of us means speaking complete garbage. His brain's there, but I see this issue as a human being, but as somebody working to try and fix it. So can anyone tell me why we're not trying to fix that issue? And we keep talking about AI and giant data platforms to cure cancer, or solve massive problems, instead of fixing the issues that frontline people have.
Thank you.
Yeah, what a good question. I haven't got the specific answer for you, but my kind of more general reflection would be, institutional change is really hard, and particularly when you're asking some organisations to give up some of the power they've traditionally had, is a really difficult thing to do. And it's why, for me, the reason, I kind of talked about the political aspects of this is that I think a lot of it boils down to political leadership and will, right, to drive some of those reforms through. You look at some of the successes in modernising governments and public services around the world recently, it's mostly been to do with political leaders with a vision and an ability to take on some of the vested interests. But you're right, like actually, you think about other aspects of our lives and things revolve around us. And it ought to be that way in this environment, I would have thought.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a disconnect between what people in communities would say would be their expectation, that actually, this is my data, and I would expect you to have that data shared amongst the people who are giving my care so that my care can be coordinated. And the institutional perspective, which is really quite risk averse, because we think, well, what can possibly go wrong here? How, if somebody really took exception to that data being shared and they didn't want that data shared, then there's a risk of legal action and all of that. So there's a real dilemma in all of that. I had a really interesting session yesterday with the chair and chief executive of the Scottish Fire and Rescue. And they were talking about work that they're doing with the ambulance service and with NHS 24 and with the 350 fire and rescue stations that we've got across Scotland, and what they can do about immediate response and resuscitation. They're doing some 70,000 interventions in people's homes, in which they can not only give fire advice, but they can also help to spot where there are things going wrong, be it abuse, be it a social breakdown. And one of the main issues for them is, how can that data be shared and how can they play their part as part of a public service team? So I think there's a real dilemma there. I think that's recognised in government, and I think one of the things of the strategy is that that's something that we want to do much, much better, because for a lot of people in communities, it ain't working particularly well.
So there's a bit of instant feedback for you, Chris, on the next screen, I believe, about what you've said. Shall we move that on?
Cool. This one?
Yeah. So here's a question for you to answer on your phones this time. Listening to the conversation this morning, what do you feel are the biggest priorities right now for digital health and care in Scotland?
And are these the answers? Have people done this already?
Yeah. So
you guys have done this,
you can see that we're back kind of where we started in a sense, because that was the first question to the Cabinet Secretary and Councillor Currie this morning, wasn't it? How do we make this focused around citizens? What else have we got? Information governance, I just raised that. There's not a huge amount of interest in that, I think, as a priority. I'm kind of interested in what other might mean. Who pressed other? And what are your concerns? Is anyone going to actually volunteer to say who pressed other? Yes? Oh, well, hang on, you've had a go. You've had a go. There's a lady there.
Hi, I pressed other because I thought the yellow area, connectivity between health and social care to share data, and the one that is joining up different parts of healthcare, that's blue, actually are missing the point going on to the gentleman at the front there, that I work in the NHS, I've worked in primary care, secondary care, and in voluntary services. And the biggest barrier to us being able to stop working these silo models of IT developments across health and social care and making it joined up is to be able to create a single-use platform that primary and secondary care can use, because our data sharing is already there. And I understand the barrier is that there is an issue with the procurement systems not being lined up. So the primary care IT procurement is separate to the secondary care IT procurement. And if we actually just start again, remodel, and do that joint procurement, we're actually going to take a massive leap forward in all the other areas we're talking about for yesterday and today.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a, and that connects to this wider conversation about how do you have government build platforms, not just services, and if you can build them once and then a wide range of people can reuse them, then wouldn't that be a sensible thing for the public sector to do? And you're right, and sometimes, it feels like bashing your head against a brick wall, but it's also so obviously the answer in so many circumstances. Okay.
This gentleman here.
I was interested in in that comment back there. I don't think it's right to try to join everything together. What we can do is separate the apps from the data, and I think that's partly what you're saying in terms of services. So the services is centred around the patient, and then we build all the individual apps we need. It worries me a little that everything's still thought in terms of connectivity. In other words, here's my siloed app in my place in my organisation. Make the data citizen-centric and let the apps fit whatever organisation and care stream we're doing.
Yeah, and I think I wasn't here yesterday. Did Estonia get mentioned? Usually gets mentioned in these sorts of things. So I'm sure many of you know this, but one of the things, so Estonia is a very digital administration, but one of the interesting things from the perspective of this conversation is this idea that you have the health data sitting on a platform, but you also have the ability for individual citizens to interrogate how it's been used, who's accessed it, and you have the ability to plug different services into it. So like you say, sort of separating out the different needs from the fundamental infrastructure and doing that in a way which is very privacy protecting for people.
Now I'm told that if we click this, you're going to see some of the other questions that are coming up that people are asking. So if it's anything like yesterday, there'll be about 123 of them.
Right.
But can we scroll down using it?
Just use the arrow at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, this one here?
Chris, yeah, you're in control.
I'm in control, am I? Okay. So I press this and
you can self-select the questions that you find easy, or you can let me and Malcolm find you some of the stinkers.
It's like one of those exams, like, do I go all the way to the end to find the easy ones, or do I pick the easy ones when I see them?
Well, if there's something that's particularly resonant, let's have a look.
You can ask each other questions.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not asking myself any questions, Margaret. Don't worry about that. Yeah. Things there, Malcolm, that you're seeing to pick up?
Well, at that point about mental health conditions, and just the ability to use technology and apps, particularly around cognitive behavioural therapies and some of the work that NHS 24 is taking forward, and it's all about giving people in communities control and ownership of their health. So I think there is much more potential for that. Clearly, when we get into more serious, enduring mental health conditions, I don't think we can get away from having, relationships with people, in a therapeutic relationship. But I think there's an awful lot more that we can do to help people stay well and emotionally well, and have control over their lives. And I think some of the work we're seeing coming forward on child and adolescent mental health services, and there's been a lot of focus on the tier 3, tier 4, the most unwell young people, but actually what we're seeing coming through, particularly through schools, is a lot of young people suffering an awful lot of distress, some of which can be helped by school counsellors and others, some of which can be helped by use of technology and using well-informed apps in order to take some better control of their health. So I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and just to add on mental health, we didn't talk about things like artificial intelligence very much in the session just now, but I've seen some really interesting, folk who are trying to build, products and services that are able to ingest different forms of data and do things like diagnosis and prediction and so on, and lots of it's still work in progress, but there are live examples of, and you might think well or bad of them, but things like classrooms that are technologically enabled, where you've got an AI system running in the background that is assessing the mental state and stress of kids in the classroom, so that you can try to identify who is under more pressure or spot things like bullying and mental health conditions. But figuring out actually how comfortable do we feel with those sorts of technologies, and how do you trade some of the different aspects of it are really hard.
And we've kind of just scrolled through, and Eliza on a very interesting one, which I think goes to the heart of some of what the Cabinet Secretary was saying before, really, which is the one on the screen there. Shouldn't the conversations be more around what do the public want for and from health and social care, rather than what type of tech they want. So that goes to the heart, I think, of technology being an enabler rather than an end in itself. And going back to what I was saying about, the people who give you the solutions, it's more about the widget and the gadget and the gizmo and what it can do for you and your organisation rather than actually how it meets the needs of individuals.
And I think if when we do ask the public what they want or what they don't want, one of the things they don't want is to regularly travel long distances to go to 10-15-minute outpatient appointments in the specialist centre. So that Attend Anywhere software that we're seeing rolled out right the way across health services in Scotland has got huge potential to connect people with particular skills to people in local communities, and it just seems to me to be a win-win-win. It's a win for the people because they don't have to travel. It's a win because we don't have to, they don't have to pay travelling expenses. It's a win because family life isn't disrupted, and it's a win because economic life isn't disrupted. And it's a huge win for the environment in terms of the amount of carbon emissions that are emitted within Scotland for all of the patient travel that goes on around the place. So the application of that sort of technology that really puts people in control and allows those conversations to take place in a safe clinical environment, that seems to be what people want.
Yeah.
And I think we need to roll that out at pace and scale.
You do, and I think the lesson from all of this, digital age is that you have to. There's a job to be done, and the job varies by sector, but it's about actually meeting people's needs and expectations. And I think for me, one of the big tragedies of the political conversation around all of this at the moment is, we should be talking about how does technology give the opportunity to do genuinely transformational things that make people's lives better. But what we mostly talk about is, are we going to spend X billion pounds more on healthcare or X plus Y billion pounds more? And whoever can ramp that up higher is declared the person who is most, thoughtful about all of this. And that's a really crazy place to be.
There's a very interesting one here up on the screen where somebody's quoting you back at yourself here, saying we need to get the basics right. And I think the question is about what do we mean by the basics? Do we mean the basics of the technology, or do we actually mean the basics of capacity within organisations to embrace it? Again, if you're not going to be going down the blind alley of buying a solution which actually won't fit you, that you need to have that capacity and that understanding within the organisation to make that choice. But certainly from a voluntary sector point of view, I'm recognising very much the comment about firefighting, because people are very, very occupied doing the do. And some of the organisations who were here yesterday showcasing, they have moved heaven and earth actually to invest, usually from reserves, in these kinds of technologies, which are then helping them, but actually the day-to-day business is still pretty precarious in a lot of social care organisations, I think. So when you talked about the basics there, did you mean both of those things, or?
So I did, but I think it's you're right. It's often easy to think about this in terms of what are the services facing citizens that don't exist that I would like to exist. But then there is something, as you say, about just the level of capacity and capability to execute on this. And one of the things that I often think is that if you get it right, technology ought to unlock a lot of resource at the front line or near the front line, because you can strip away a lot of bureaucracy and some of the tasks which everybody knows are a big waste of time if we could just fix this. But it's exactly your point. How do you carve out the management and leadership bandwidth in the organisation, and how do you find the resources that you need to invest in order to get there? And we often get stuck in this cycle of we can't find the resources, so we're always firefighting, so we never actually do the thing that would save us all a lot of effort. And that is a kind of, that's, as you well know, right, that kind of plagues, large parts of the voluntary sector beyond just the environment they're talking about today. It's hard, right? But I guess it goes back to this point around you've got to have leadership that understand that we're going to have to be brave and sometimes forceful. There will be some things that we have to stop doing. This isn't just about use technologies and do it all still just a little bit faster. Some things we stop, and some things other people do in partnership with us. And that's much easier now than it used to be.
And I think what I was signalling in my opening remarks, and I think what Ms. Freeman was signalling, is a thing about the pace and scale of digital reform in Scotland. I mean, I'm particularly struck by what NES are doing in terms of the digital platform, and really sort of listening to people, designing, testing and building in an iterative manner. I think there's a lot to be done with that kind of a methodology across statutory organisations, so not going out for the big solution that's going to cover all of the organisation, that's going to cost multi-million pounds, and by the time we get there, it's not going to work for us. So I think the notion of collaboration across Scottish public service organisations is absolutely where we want to be. And the leadership question I think Ms Freeman was addressing is that as organisations, as we're taking forward digital innovation, to reach out to other organisations and say, well, how can you contribute to this? How can we do things together so that we're not doing kind of silo working, be it in a health board or a local authority or an IJB or a third sector organisation. We're constantly looking for ways to collaborate using agile type methodology and building up systems that are really going to work for people in their own communities.
We're pretty much out of time for this session, but Chris's BDI has alighted on a question, well, not a question, more of a plea, I think, which is that one you see right in the centre of the screen. Please tell us more about the importance of user research, because we are getting pushback on that. So get your notepads at the ready, because you are just about to get that assistance from Chris. So you can go back and quote it in your organisation.
Well, I mean, it's insane if you're getting pushback, because this is one of the most important things if you're in this arena that you should be doing, right? Like, nobody knows what the experience is going to be like better than your service users. The idea that you can sit there and have somebody just decide, you know, floating in a bubble what the right answer is patently not right. You think about any digital platform these days, they're all about how do you continuously ingest feedback from the people using the service in order to improve it. I would say, like, a very powerful thing that you can do, and anybody in this room can do, is you can build something called a friction deck, right? So a friction deck is where you go in, you try to use the service as a service user, and every time something is awkward or difficult or you can't figure it out or it wastes your time, you take a screenshot or you take a photo or whatever it is, and you put it on a page. And then you go to your person who is telling you that we don't need to use research, and you give them the 200-page pack saying these are all the pain points of somebody trying to use this service that we operate. And, you know, if that doesn't bring it to life, then I don't know what will.
Okay, well, thanks very much to Chris. Can we show our appreciation in the usual way? And thanks for bearing with me, and indeed Malcolm. We'll sign off.
Yes, indeed.
So, yeah, can I just thank Annie and Malcolm and obviously Chris very much. I mean, it's a bit of a different way of doing it. I think the discussion with the Cabinet Secretary and Councillor Currie, I think, was really sort of enlightening, I think, instead of facilitative. I mean, there's lots of challenges. I mean, I think we've heard some solutions and some suggestions too, but I think we can only sort of address those by continuing our collaboration, listening to our users, looking at the needs of users and designing in that co-design fashion. So lots to reflect on, lots to do. You're going into now a coffee break. Again, use the opportunity to network and talk to colleagues. Then you have a range of parallel sessions really for most of the day, so really take advantage of those. We will be back into a plenary session just before 3 o'clock where Jeff Huggins and his team will be sharing and talking about the work on the digital platform and related work. So I know there's a lot of interest in that. So hope to see many of you back here. Then we've got our public lecture this evening with Sir Harry Burns. Again, hopefully some of you are registered for that, but we're also hoping to attract in sort of different people as well from the wider sort of public. So again, thank you very much to Malcolm and Annie, and enjoy your coffee.